Today on Capechi's Corner, we're going to factor out the greatest common factor. This will be our first lesson in factoring. When factoring a polynomial, the first step you want to take is to factor out a GCF, or the greatest common factor. You're going to look at every term in the polynomial and identify the constant and or the variables that are found in each and every term. This monomial is called the greatest common factor. So let's look at number 1. We have 3x plus 6. Two terms, it's a binomial. We need to figure out what goes into each term. So I'm looking at 3x and looking at 6. I know that it looks like 3 goes into both, but no variable, because I have an x in the first term but not an x in the second term. So I'm actually going to divide each term by 3. That 3 is going to come out front, and 3x divided by 3 gives me x, and then 6 divided by 3 gives me 2. What I just did there is I factored out my greatest common factor. Now if I want to check my work, I can distribute. 3 times x gives me 3x, 3 times 2 gives me plus 6, which is what I started with, so I factored correctly. In number 2, I'm going to do the same thing. Looking at 5x minus 15, the greatest common factor is 5. So if it helps you to divide, you don't have to, but if that part right there visually helps you, you should definitely do it. So 5x divided by 5 gives me x, minus 15 divided by 5 gives me 3. And looking at number 3, my greatest common factor is 2. 2 goes into 2x squared, and into negative 8x, and into negative 2. So I'm going to divide everything by 2, and that's what I get in parentheses. Again, I have to remember to put out my greatest common factor up front, and I'm left with x squared minus 4x minus 1. And looking at number 4, my coefficients are 4 and 8, and then my constant in the end is 5. Now there's no number that goes into all three of those. When I'm looking at my y values, I have y to the second, and then I have y, but I don't have any y in my last term, so there's no greatest common factor. So I just say that this is in simplest form because I can't factor anything out. And looking at number 5, I have 5y cubed plus 50y squared minus 5. I notice that they're all divisible by 5, so that's going to become my greatest common factor. Again, because one term does not have a variable, I know that taking out a variable is not an option. So again, if visually this helps you, I'll divide everything by 5, and I'm left with y cubed plus 10y squared minus 1. If you want to check that, you can use your distributive property to see if you get back to where you started. In number 6, I notice that each term is divisible by 10, so that looks like that's going to be greatest common factor for me. But on top of it, I do have p in each term. So I have p to the 4th, p to the 2nd, and p to the 1st. So I can only take out a p to the 1st because this last term only has that. It doesn't have any more than just one p. So I'm going to divide everything by 10p because 10p is my greatest common factor. Now remember, when you do that, you need to pull that monomial out front. And I have 10p to the 4th divided by 10p gives me p to the 3rd. And then my second term, I have 20p squared divided by 10p gives me 2p. And my last term, I get plus 7. And looking at number 7, I realize that a 6 is divisible into each one of those terms, so I'm going to pull that out. I also have x to the 4th, x to the 3rd, and x to the 2nd. So x to the 2nd is my lowest x value that I can take out. Now if I divide everything by 6x to the 2nd, again, if this helps you visually, you should definitely do it. And I'm left with x to the 2nd plus 5x plus 1. In number 8, I have x to the 4th, 3x to the 3rd, and 10x. Now because the coefficient for x to the 4th is 1, there is no greatest common factor with a number that I can take out. So I just have to look for my variables. Now I do have an x in every term. So I'm going to factor out an x, and again I'll divide everything by x, and I'm left with x to the 3rd plus 3x to the 2nd plus 10. In number 9, I have a coefficient other than 1 in my terms, but there isn't a greatest common factor that goes into 2, 5, and 14. However, I do have an x to the 1st, that's going to factor out, that's my greatest common factor. So I have x times the quantity of x to the 2nd plus 5x plus 14.